Thank you, Gwa. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to start this evening with a little bit of a poll. We've got 4 of these as we go through the presentation, just to sort of start things off. So first of all, I just wanted you to have a think about how useful you think body condition scoring is as a management tool for you at the moment. 1 is not at all, and I think it goes up, does it go up to 8 or 10? I'll launch it now. If you just want to have a little go at that to start with, and then we might just have another look at it later on as well and see how we're going. So if you'd like to have a little go and just choose one of those options, that would be really good. Excellent. Okay, that's great. We'll end that now. So that's really good, because if I share those results with you, then most of you are feeling it's pretty beneficial. No one's going the whole hog to number 8, but everyone's already thinking that it's pretty useful to them. So that's good. We'll see if we can increase that even further by the time I get to the end. Okay, right. So really just to recap, I'm sure, on things that you already know, but just maybe put it in a slightly different context tonight as well, and hopefully enthuse you to go away and maybe use body condition scoring a bit more than you currently are. So I think just quickly to recap, I'm not going to teach everybody condition score tonight. I'm assuming you know how to do that. But just really to sort of emphasise, first and foremost, what body condition scoring is actually doing, because it isn't something abstract, it is something that was developed scientifically. But what it's really doing is just giving us a really good measure of how much energy reserve that ewe has got on board in terms of fat. Now that's really important to an animal like a sheep, because of course she is going to rely on some of that energy reserve at times during the year, and therefore it follows that, you know, if she's lean and she hasn't got much of an energy reserve, there's going to be a mechanism, an evolutionary mechanism, which says to her, do you know what, actually you really can't carry that many lambs, therefore there is going to be an effect on litter size, and as that increases, she effectively physiologically is going to feel more secure. So we get better performance. And of course, at the other end, and we'll mention as we go through, if she gets far too fat, then she also knows that that's going to have an effect on her overall productivity. So I guess we already know that, but it's just really useful to remember that this is her energy reserve, and it's what she will draw on when the nutrition that's available isn't supplying everything she needs. So late pregnancy, early lactation specifically. So again, you're all used to seeing this sort of table with body condition scores. These are scores that have been going around. I've been doing this job for a lot of years, as many of you know, and these are the sorts of table that we've been using. And at the moment, we're doing a lot of work, and we're not changing particularly those scores, although we might be challenging whether or not we want ewes to get down quite as low as 2.5 at weaning, but we can come back to that later. But about 7 years ago, I was in New Zealand, and it's a funny story this, because I was in New Zealand and I met an Australian, so get that one if you can. And I've been thinking about body condition scoring and how we could actually try and harness the technology that we now have, which is EID and the hardware, of course, and being able to log a lot of individual animal information very quickly, very easily, and how we could actually make use of that. And I came across this guy, and basically he was running this project called Lifetime Wool. And these were merinos, and their output was wool, so it's quite a bit from where we would be. We don't even mention wool in this country at the moment, do we? But really what they found was they took body condition and they made it their one prime management target. And they said, look, what happens if we have these merinos overall in better condition than we have been doing? So the previous was the orange line. So if we increase that, and we also stop the big fluctuations in weight? And what they found was that when they did that, very clearly their output increased and their profitability increased. And so I thought, well, there's got to be something in this, and so we've got to look at it more carefully. Because prior to EID, of course, all we could do was to look at body condition and scores and changes on a group basis. It was really difficult, unless you were just doing a small number of animals, to monitor individual animals through and see what was happening over a period of time, and indeed over the whole production cycle, as you can see now. So we're very used to talking about body condition affecting ovulation rates. We're very used to that, aren't we? So we know that a ewe that's thin, lean, going into tupping, her ovulation rate is likely to be less than one that's fit. We try and make up for that a little bit with flushing, but it really very rarely does make up for it completely, as we found, particularly in this part of the world, 2018, when we had the drought and we had a lot of thin sheep and we had some pretty awful scanning results. But my question was, well, what happens in terms of if we keep that going through the season? What happens if we monitor ewes at different body condition scores and we look at and we analyse it all the way through this production cycle, through to implantation, placental development, birth weight of lambs and colostrum, milk yield and lamb performance, of course, and then all the way back round again to that recovery of body condition score, which is the phase that most of us are in at the moment, trying to get them right again for the tup. And so the idea was to use the technology that we have, and I've run one project in England and also one project in Wales with the TAG group. We did 3 seasons of really detailed work with weight and body condition scoring. Could we pick up more? Could we see that it was having an effect, not just at the time, so not just condition score effect at tupping, but if the condition score, did it have an effect all the way through to the next year? And if so, how big? So that's what we did. So to start with, no great surprises. So here we've got, this is actually one flock, and on the left-hand graph, what we've got is the effect of breed. So there were several different crosses and breeds there. And on the right-hand side, you've got the different years where we actually looked at the data. And you can see I'd already started playing with this, but we got the data and we backtracked with it after I came zooming back from New Zealand with my big ideas. And you can see there, as you would expect, body condition score at mating, the higher it goes, the better the litter size at scanning. That's what we would expect, and that's what we've seen. And then another one, which you might expect to see, is what happens in terms of body condition score at lambing and lamb weight at 8 weeks. So here you've got, this is combined lamb weight for twins. Again, you've got different breeds. The lines go in similar direction. Whatever reason, the clin didn't respond as much as the others, but I don't think we would read too much into that. But when you analyse that, what we found was that body condition score at lambing, 1 unit of BCS for this cohort was worth 5.4 kilograms of lamb. So that's 2.7 kilos per lamb for twins at weaning, which is not to be sniffed at all. So those two things you might kind of say, well, yeah, we might expect that. But with EID, we can start to explore other things as well. So we can begin to look at changes over time. So we can look at ewes and say, well, what happens if a ewe changes body condition score from weaning through to tupping and from tupping through to scanning? What influence does that have if we follow those individual ewes through in terms of how they perform later on? We can also start to look at weight and weight changes. And with, you know, obviously you can see here we were using auto drafts and so on, but with weight, what you find is as well, is that if you have got the technology, we can use weight and substitute that for some of the body condition scoring, which, you know, saves our poor old hands from doing hundreds of ewes all the time. And we were also looking for the practical application for all of this. So here we go again with our ewes at body condition score at mating and the effect that that has on litter size. But let's just have a look at another graph now that comes in. Now this one isn't body condition score, it's weight change, but weight and body condition are one of the same things, but weight obviously is more sensitive. I score down to quarter scores, but even so, I can still pick up more subtle changes with weight if I'm weighing them at the same time. And what we started to see was that actually this litter size at scanning thing, it wasn't necessarily to do with body condition score actually at Tupping. It was much more to do with how they had changed from weaning, and it continued through to scanning. So even when we split it out, and one of the flocks was really good, when the rams came out, we would body condition score them again and then look at the change between rams out and scanning. What we found very clearly was that the best scanning results were in those ewes that continued to move upwards, not just from weaning through to Tupping, but from Tupping to scanning. Now that completely blows out of the water some of the stuff that I certainly was taught, and I'm sure you were taught for many years as well, which was that when a ewe was actually safely in lamb, so beyond the implantation stage, it was okay for her to lose a little bit of condition. In fact, some of the textbooks would say it's okay for her to lose up to half a score. All the work that we've done with this, and there's many, many thousands bits of data in there, that has completely refuted that. And it's because we can follow these individual ewes through. So that's a big finding, that we need to keep these ewes at least level, and we certainly can't be affording to let them drop body condition from Tupping through to scanning. So we're already picking up a longer term effect. And then what we said was, well, okay, so we've got to scanning, but what about our other key performance indicators? And we used an 8-week weight. Arguably, you might say 6 weeks might be better, but you know, I've been around farms long enough that trying to get 6-week weights on lambs is one thing. 8 weeks is a little bit more practical, and you guys are a little bit happier with it. But this is a measure of how well the ewe is doing, of course, if we go at 8 weeks. And then we looked at weaning, and we went for 90 days. So we correct everything back for 90 days, and that's coming down to weaning it being probably sooner than people think they should be. But again, that's another story. We ought to be weaning earlier, probably. So what we found was that with these, if you look at the green line there, so that's 300 grams a day, which is a reasonably good target for growth rates for twins. And what that amounts to at 56 days is 20 kilos. So we're looking for 20 kilos at 56 days and 30 kilos at 90 days. That's what we're looking for. And these are the sorts of measures that we were then saying, well, can we actually look at those performances of the lambs and log that back to the ewe's body condition, not just at lambing, but at scanning and the previous weaning and everything else. And that's what we were trying to do. So looking at some of these graphs again, here we've got the one on the right-hand side is the one that it's a reverse of the one that you saw before, actually. So here what we've got now is combined weight of twins, so the total weight of lambs that twin-bearing ewes are rearing at 8 to 8 weeks. And here we've got change in body condition score. So those ewes that are looking after themselves and gaining body condition, their lambs aren't as heavy. Those ewes that are losing body condition, their lambs are heavier, which is again what we would expect and what we saw earlier on. But now look at the left-hand side of the screen. And this one is the change in ewe body condition score the previous year. So between weaning and Tupping, and we can take it from weaning to scanning as well. The result looks very similar. So this is the previous year. So this is sitting here as we are now, what the ewes are going to do between now and Tupping stroke scanning, and what effect that has on their lamb performance next year. And you can see that it is quite obvious that those ewes that are gaining weight, and actually we can look at actual BCS as well, but there is an effect and it comes through every time. So what we do now going to have a really quite profound effect on the potential for those ewes and how well they rear their lambs next year. So that's the sort of thing that we were picking up, and obviously we haven't got time to go into huge detail tonight, but I really just want to emphasize that what we do now will affect next year. So one of the reasons for that is that if we start looking at what happens, we're going back now to this graph, which is all these lamb weights within a flock. One of the other things that we found was that here's our targets of 20 kilos and 30 kilos, but we also started to develop a KPI, which was those lambs below 17 kilos or below at 56 days. And what we found was these chaps down here, doesn't matter, almost without fail, were the same lambs that were here. And so really importantly, the percentage of lambs that were falling below about 85% of the target at 8 weeks were going to be the ones that were going to stay down here and be, you know, the scruffs and roughs all the way through the season. And of course, they're the ones that are losing us the money. So the other thing that this was forcing us to do, and I loathe averages, and those of you who know, I'm going to show you a slide now which has got some averages on, but it's also got the histograms on which those averages are built. Because what it's telling us is that, yeah, we might be not too happy with that average, of course. This was one of the flocks. I'll show you its body condition scores as we go through in a minute. But it was missing the target of 30 kilos at 90 days. The flock was thin. It was really lean. We worked really hard. And by 2 years later, what we got here was that we got an average at 90 kilos, 90 days of 33 1/3 kilos, and we were hitting the target with 2/3 of the lambs. But the concentration of effort is to try and get rid of these down here. And when you look at it and you take it through, body condition is having a major effect on how many lambs are missing those targets. And they're the ones that are losing us the money. So, just because I know somebody will ask the question, there's not as much data in here because only one of the flocks had fat ewes basically. But again, at every point you can see here that if they're too fat, and really that is over body condition score 4, reasonably relaxed in a half-bred ewe at 3.5 to 3.75 to 4-ish, above 4, but you can see the trend lines are that they are starting to come down as the body condition score gets too high. Okay, sorry, right, I've gone too far. Right, so now what I want to do is to ask you another poll question. Oh, come on, no, don't do that to me. Go back to the previous. I need my bar. There we are. So let's have another little poll. Let's go for number 2. And just pick one of those that suits you the best, that you feel actually maybe encompasses how you feel about body condition score at the moment. Okay, so yeah, we've got a nice split there, haven't we, in terms of how people feel. Some people using it at least 3 times, others saying they don't really use it as a management tool at the moment, and everything in between. So that's good. Now let's so we'll see whether or not we can manage to pull you all a little bit up in terms of your willingness to use it a little bit more as we go through this. Okay, right, so what I'm also now going to do is I'm just going to pop up the next one as well. We've only got 4, we've only got one more after this one. So my next question is, how long do you reckon, because it's relevant to where we are at the moment, of course, how long do you reckon it takes to shift a ewe from body condition score 2 to body condition score 3? So not an unusual situation, I wouldn't have thought, for many of you to be in the post-weaning, pre-tupping phase. Okay, so again, we've got a nice spread, haven't we? I have to say there's no right and wrong answer on this one. It's not a trick question quite, but there is quite a difference. And there is no right or wrong. You know, obviously we've got some people who are greater than 8 weeks. I would say from the experience of having tried to do this quite a lot over recent years, it's probably more here than down here. It's certainly 3 to 4 weeks is going to be, yeah, with a mature ewe, probably you're not going to do that. You might get half a score in it. So it's more at this end of the scale if we're going to do that. So let me just get rid of that and then we'll move on to here. So one of the things that we can do is, and what we did within the work that we were doing was I just took the AFRC requirements and worked out what I thought the energy requirement was. These were for ewes of about 65, 70 kilos body weight. What their maintenance requirement for energy was, what I needed energy wise to put the weight back on, working on about 11–12% of body weight per score. And then I worked it out as to how many kilos of grass was actually available. And what happens when you do that is that, number one, you realise just how much kilogram grass dry matter you need to shift some of these ewes. And also the quality that it needs to be as well, because that dry matter needs to be reasonably high quality dry matter grass if you're actually going to do it. And the other thing that was absolutely obvious to us was that as soon as you started to get down here, which a couple of the flocks were when we started, the English flocks, not the Welsh ones, the English flocks, actually it takes almost twice as long to get from 1.5 to 2.5 as it does to get from 2.5 to 3.5. And one of the reasons for that is that once they get down here, you have started to eat into their muscle as well. So they have a long way to go. And some of the data that we looked at, it was almost double the amount of weight when you got down to very lean ewes. So just to show you an example, this is one farm, and so this is percentage of ewes here, and these are the body condition scores. They haven't come out on this slide, but these are ewes in body condition score 3, and this is at weaning. So this is the thin year. So here they are. We've got a lot of them down here at 2, 2.5, 3. A lot of ewes, and then the year where they were much better, there was less. And if we just quickly have a look at the actual implication in terms of kilograms of dry matter, then between the 2 years for this flock, a flock of about, I think it's about 1,100 ewes at the time, we needed 152,000 kilos of dry matter from weaning to tupping to achieve what we wanted. And actually, we monitored it, we did monitor dry matter, and that was pretty close to the reality. The second year, where the ewes weren't so lean, we needed 103,000 kilos of dry matter. And given what we're now learning about, you know, how difficult it is to get that condition back on, what it's really starting to say to us is that we don't ever want lean ewes, because A, there's a very long-term effect of that being so lean, and B, the cost to the rest of the flock is quite significant. Because what we had to do on that farm is we had to make some fairly big decisions, because if we wanted the ewes to be like something like they were in the right and to be in good nick when they went back to the tup, we had to bail out with every single lamb on the farm in order to be able to get that 150,000 kilos of dry matter guaranteed in front of the ewes to be able to try and get them there. But it was really important to do that, because what we've learned is that we cannot afford to go into another season with sheep that are below par and that can't hold on to that as we go through. So just looking at the development farm now, I don't know whether Pred's actually on the webinar tonight, but you know, the development farm, they had I think Red would say he'd be a little bit disappointed in his scanning last year that he had more singles than was ideal. He's done well, reared 144%, so 13% loss since scanning. Sounds a lot, but actually when you put it into context and to say that the ewes were leaner than ideal, that is actually good going. They've done a really good job. But all through, ewes have been at a relatively low body condition score on that development farm, resulting in recommendations by the consultant, the vet consultant at the time. The ewes needed extra feed in the run-up to lambing, so obviously there's a cost involved in that. Without that, you would expect that the losses would have been higher in the lambs, but there was a cost associated with that. So I know that for this season on that farm, one of the big priorities is concentrating on getting that body condition score up for Tupping in 2020. And I'll mention one or two other things in a minute, but that has to be the major goal given what we're talking about tonight. And what I would like to see from that farm this next year is to see whether or not, if we've got 8-week weights, which I'm pretty sure that Fred has got 8-week weights, if we've got them from this year, then it would be really good to be able to compare that performance with next year and be able to pull that through and demonstrate not just the effect on scanning percentage, but also in terms of how those lambs actually perform up to 8 weeks and to 90 days. Based on the data that we've got, we should see quite a big difference all the way through. And this is just an example, this was just our data, but this is just one way of looking at this BCS. So here's this flock in the first year, your body condition score up the left-hand side here, and you can see in that first year at Tupping when we got hold of them, they were all over the place. They were lean. These are half-bred ewes, and they were very, very spread out. The second year, we worked really, really hard, 150,000 kilos of dry matter hard to get them to here at Tupping in year 2. And the dividends were there. We got much better scanning, we got a much better performance in the lambs all the way through. And of course, when we came back around to year 3, we still weren't, there was a little bit more spread, but we were nowhere near here, and we weren't fighting with 50,000 kilos of dry matter that we really needed for lambs. So it comes round and fits all into the round. So just to sort of finish off with one or two ideas, one of the other things that happens when you start to use body condition score as a major KPI, as a major management tool, is that you begin to be intolerant of ewes that fall outside of that. So ewes that are a bit below par, or ewes that are a heck of a long way below par. The ewe on the right, by the way, has got hemoncosis, so she's pretty damn sick. But what happens is that these ewes start to drop out of the bottom, they drop out of the sieve, and they're there in a group, and you think, well, hang on a minute. And it points you to perhaps other things that might be going on that would cause a group of thin ewes. So you've got all sorts of things. That's a frightening mix, Midivizna, Yonis, OPA, Scrapie, we don't see much of anymore, thankfully. Sheep scab, hemoncosis, I mentioned that, liver fluke, and two that, just to concentrate on now, one's trace elements, and at Glanmynys, at the development farm, I know they've had a really careful look at trace elements because that might have been a cause of ewes having lower body condition scores, but actually nothing major has been kicked up at all. So that throws us back to, let's just get these ewes up between weaning and Tupping this time and see if we can lift them out of this leaner body condition score. And one of the other things that it does, and I learned this by condition scoring and weighing thousands of ewes over the last few years, is that you never need to go looking for your lame sheep because they're all in the thin pen. And interestingly, you can also then put some figures on what that's costing you because it's making ewes lean. So this is some work now, which is, gosh, it's 15 years old now, but no one's ever really repeated it this well. But if we look at the effects of footrot lameness, then we know that it affects fertility because it affects body condition. It affects lamb viability because it makes ewes lean. More ewes die. Affects ram fertility, of course, and also lamb growth rates for things like scold. But again, now we would know that ewes in poorer condition are also going to have lambs that grow slower anyway. But they did actually quantify it. And, you know, these figures are quite staggering, actually. They reduced the number of empty ewes by 3% by controlling the lameness and getting the body condition right. They 2% off the number of dead. The number of productive ewes went from 88 out of 100 to 93. And the net result in terms of the lambs reared went from 157 to an incredible 174 by adding all of those little incremental improvements up. That's the sort of difference that you can get. And as I say, if you're driving your management through body condition score, you're not going to tolerate lame ewes because they are going to let the side down. Now, just to finish off, this is a project that's ongoing at the moment, and this is actually an EIP funded European innovation project funded. This is with the TAG group. So these are the guys, the 6 farms that I did a lot of body condition scoring work and nutrition work with a few years ago. And they keep moving on, and now we're moving into asking questions about whether or not we can be a bit more targeted in terms of what ewes we drench and what ewes don't we drench, particularly around lambing, because we don't want to use drenches unless we really have to. Now, this is one of the farms, and it's the farm where we tend to pick up the highest fecal egg counts. And this is just to show you that, again, by using body condition score, you can see the mean lambing date, mid-lambing date there was about the end of March, just 30th of March, 31st of March. And as we were coming up to that, the fecal egg count on the mobs was starting to rise. So what we did was just go in and drench any ewes which were below the ideal body condition score. So they weren't thin, but they were below where we wanted to be. We wanted to be 3, so they were just short of 3. And that was about 50% of them. And by doing that, for the mob, you can see we dropped that fecal egg count down quite dramatically. And what that means is that using body condition score, we can target those ewes that are going to pump out lots of eggs onto the pasture and avoid treating those ewes that are in really good body condition and aren't going to pump out very many eggs. Now that project's ongoing. We've got another 2 seasons to go, and we're looking at lots of other parameters as well. But I just thought that was worth putting in there tonight because, again, it's another use for body condition score when we're trying to decide whether or not we need to treat ewes. So just finally then, just to sort of leave you with, you know, that thought really, what we're trying to do with body condition score is now, yes, we want to achieve the targets. So the targets haven't largely changed from the tables that we started off with tonight and that have been around and about there for years. I mean, all, you know, for as long as I can remember. But I think maybe as the data gets a little bit clearer as well, we probably will revise some of those targets up a little bit, particularly at weaning and maybe trying to avoid pulling too much off them during lactation because of the effect that it has later on. But generally achieving those targets. But what we want to do is to avoid major deviations at any time. So there has been a little bit of pressure out there over recent years, particularly with you guys that are perhaps out wintering, lambing outside, that, you know, that it's okay, you can afford to let these ewes lose a lot of body condition, and, you know, that they'll be all right. But the evidence now is saying that actually it isn't ever okay for them to become lean, really lean, because the cost of getting them back and the long-term cost of their productivity really is quite a big negative. So we're trying to keep them within much tighter pattern across the flock and much less variation. And if you're using body condition score regularly, that actually becomes a bit of a second nature. And as we've said, any ewes falling outside of that, you can start to look then for other reasons for them actually being that lean. So on that front, oops, let's just go back to that. Right, so I'm just going to put this poll back up again. Let's have another go at it, see how you feel about body condition score. Just don't really make me go home crying tonight, will you, and all go for number 1 or something. But we'll have another go and see how you feel now. Do you feel now that maybe body condition score has a little bit more to offer? And then, Gwa, we can see if we've got any questions.
Great, thank you, Leslie.
Okay, so we're nearly there. We've just got a few more people to vote. I can actually see how many of you are voting as well, which is quite good. Okay, nearly there, nearly there, nearly there. Okay, everybody who's going to vote. Oh, no, another one. Okay, we'll end it now. For some reason, we've got really weird result. Hang on. Oh, there we go. Excellent. Right, that was my fault. I wasn't showing the tens, was I? So that's great. Yeah. Okay. So you're all down the bottom end of the scale now, which is fantastic. I think, you know, body condition scoring has been around for a long while, but combining that with the technology that we've now got, it is a powerful tool. It really is. So I'll end my presentation there and stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Leslie. That was very, very interesting. Does anybody have any questions that you'd like to ask Leslie? Please bear in mind that this is a unique opportunity for you to be able to ask a specialist a question, anything in general or anything which is relevant to your own flock. So if you could send any questions in now before we finish. In the meanwhile, if we are waiting for questions, Leslie, yep. I have a question of my own. So I know you touched on the fact that very rarely you're dealing with ewes which are body condition too fat, really. What would be the adverse effects of that in terms of when they're lambing afterwards? I understand that you would most probably get more prolapse issues and so on, but is there any impact then on the lamb if ewes are too fat? In terms of, would they then be less likely to take more nutrients and more minerals in, which could impact lamb vigor and the lamb's immune system then?
I mean, I think there does tend to be an effect on lamb vigor because ewes that are too fat tend to be a bit more lethargic, so they're probably not quite as attentive mothers. They are more prone to metabolic problems. So a ewe that's been wobbling a bit with a metabolic problem is not going to be as lambs aren't going to be as good, and she's not going to be quite as attentive and with it, and a mothering instinct isn't going to be as strong. So, you know, they've got to be very fat, and yes, there's the prolapse thing, and also, you know, you've also got to say that a very fat ewe, if you get really warm conditions, she's going to actually, so if you're lambing outside and so on, and they're really fat, she's going to find it more difficult to lamb, and she's also maybe going to be a bit prone to heat stress.
Yeah. No, I thought, it's just best to ask really, because you do have some flocks which tend to be more on the fat side, leaning towards perhaps too fat sometimes as well. So we do have a few questions coming in for you, Leslie. So the first one, asking, can you do body condition scoring by eye just to speed things up?
No, unfortunately not. You know, I could, I love doing real live demonstrations and spending a few hours getting ready for it, because I can bet my bottom dollar, if you give me long enough, I'll be able to totally confuse you by doing it by eye, because you can't. I mean, okay, you can tell the difference between a really skinny sheep and a really fat sheep, yeah, but the nuances in between, you can't. And one body condition score, as we saw, you know, as we went through, is a lot of weight, and it makes a big difference. So unfortunately not. What we are trying to do, and that's still ongoing, is with the technology that we've got now, we also know that we can't sort of say, right, you've got a flock of X breed and then their weight is normally, say, 70 kilos. So why don't we just sort of weigh them all, and anything that's below 60 is going to be, we can't do that because there's such a huge variation between animals. But what we are trying to do is, if we could actually body condition score each individual animal once a year, say pre-tupping, and you log that into your software, then we're trying to work an algorithm which would take that animal, so say that's her weight, and then we would have a variation around that weight, and we could actually effectively remotely condition score that one animal. So we are trying to do that, because that would be a really, really useful way of harnessing the potential of the technology that we've got now.
Great, Leslie, thank you. And another question coming in. If you have a high body condition score, is it better to reduce it early on post-tupping?
No, I wouldn't. On the basis of the data that we've got now, I shiver actually when I hear about trying to take body condition off ewes anyway. Again, I've tried it. You know, you get ewes, they're very fat this time of year, and then people historically they try and rip all that condition off them and then want to put it back on later on. But if you think about the efficiency, that's not very efficient. So you're wasting all of that onboard energy, and then you're spending kilos of dry matter trying to get it back up. So if they're too fat now, they're too fat basically. And my feeling would be you have to run with that, and you have to try and keep them level. Don't let them get any fatter, but try and keep them level. The trick is that if you have got ewes that are very fat, and this sounds silly, doesn't it? But just do something about it before they get so fat. Don't wait till weaning. Be monitoring it before that, and try not to let them get so fat in the first place.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. Still a few more questions coming in. Is there a time of year when it's best to start with body condition scoring? What time of year should act as your benchmark? Now,
absolutely now. This is the really critical time. So hopefully most people have got wean now. And you know, it does take, most people got roundabout, but it does take a good 8 weeks to put a condition score on. And if she's less than condition score 2, that flock that I referred to, I had 110 days in order to try and get that flock right, and we still didn't quite make it. So it really, we do tend to underestimate how long it takes. So now is absolutely the right time. If we get it right now, then that will have a really positive effect all the way through to this time next year.
Okay, great. Another question, is it worth drenching ewes with expensive vitamin drenches if ewes are a bit thin?
No, not unless you need to. I might make you feel good, but you know, I think, and then the development farm is a classic example of that, I think, well, because you know they have done quite a bit of, you know, they've done some, and for the group that I did last week, we did some more on that farm, and there isn't any evidence that there is an issue. And it would be really easy, wouldn't it, for them just to turn around and say, well, you know, we better go and spend X thousand pounds on expensive vitamin drenches. And that there is, the evidence is not there. What the evidence is saying is that what we need to do is to allow more kilos of dry matter, basic macro nutrition, to let those ewes get that energy reserve back on their backs. So there will be some farms who have got deficiencies, but, you know, spending a lot of money on expensive drenches is not going to make up for the fact that there isn't enough energy out there for them to put it on their backs.
Yeah. Would you possibly recommend, Leslie, for any farmers which are concerned that they do have a trace elements deficiency within their flock, would you recommend that they go out and blood test these animals before they consider really the vitamin drench? Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would.
So,
I mean,
sorry,
I was going to say, and now's a good time to do that as well, you know. And I think there is there's still on offer, isn't there, some funding to be able to go and do that through Farming Connect, isn't there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my slides at the beginning, there is the animal health clinics which do offer funding towards trace element or blood testing for trace elements deficiencies. So if you do think that you do have an issue, I would definitely recommend that you contact your local development officer, which will then be able to help you get access to that. So moving on, we still have a few questions before we finish. If ewes are in good body condition score, does flushing have any effect?
It has but no. The easy answer is no. If they're in the right body condition score, then that's what you need to do, is to hold them. So flushing is that effect, which is if the ewes are in lower body condition score. And basically what flushing is one of the beauties, the things that are really clever about a sheep is that if you take a fit sheep and you take a lean sheep and you give them the access to the same pasture, the lean sheep will eat 30% more than the fit sheep. So she's actually flushing herself because she's hungrier. And that really is what flushing is all about. So in some ways, it doesn't matter if you give the fit sheep the same grazing, but you probably don't want to because you want to save it for the lean ones. But the lean ones will eat more. And anybody who's rotationally paddock grazing will see this, that, you know, you work out what your dry matters are, you put thin sheep on there, and 10 days later you go back and think, oh my God, where's it all gone? The same sort of area, you put fit sheep on and they're still quite happy. But I think the thing is to save that extra grazing for those lean ewes, but we don't want them in the first.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. A question from Hill Beach. Blanket drenching of a combined fluke and wormer is frowned upon now. So would you only recommend targeting the thin ewes with a wormer over the next few weeks?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. And even then, yes, I mean, if you're going to target them, the thin ones would be the one to go for. But you know what? It's actually worth checking them with a fecal egg count to see whether or not that is having an effect, because the chances are it's not. And so, you know, again, I think there's money available to do some fecal egg counting. Yeah. That might be a good way of spending that money.
Yes.
The fluke, we are starting to rack things up a bit on that now. It's too early to start testing ewes for fluke at the moment, but just to make people aware that if you have a history of fluke, what you can do now is you can go in and you can get some a blood test done on lambs. So it's got to be this year's lambs, and that will tell you whether or not your lambs have been exposed to fluke. So it's giving you a real heads up as to whether or not fluke's going to be a problem on your farm. So that's again worth just talking to your vet about.
Most definitely, Leslie. So are younger ewes more prone to lose body condition after lambing? Do they need more energy?
Sorry, which ewes, Gwa?
Younger ewes.
Younger ewes, yes they are.
Yeah.
Yes they are. I mean, younger ewes have got less reserve on board because they're still growing. And so again, if you remember that graph I showed you with my lambs below 85%, so below 17 kilos, if you look at that, a lot of those lambs, actually when you look at it, a good percentage of them are on the younger ewes. So one of the things that we did is we just make sure we give those ewes an extra little bit of TLC after lambing. So if you're not feeding anything else, think about perhaps feeding the younger ewes a little bit and feeding them for a little bit longer. And that makes a huge difference.
Great, thank you, Leslie. And just two more questions to finish. How regularly should you be checking body condition score of ewes to be able to make adjustments?
A very good question. I mean, certainly at those times, sort of now and, you know, I would say between now and pre-tupping, I think if you split them up into their groups, you certainly want to be handling them every, you know, your lean groups you want to be looking at again every 3 or 4 weeks to make sure that they're actually improving. For me, you can't handle them, you know, you need to be handled again between now and mating, again just pre-tupping, and then I would want to do them at a point between tupping and scanning. Then you'd handle them again at scanning, and then again, you know, around about time when you give them their clostridial booster or heptavac booster, and all the way through really, so that all the time what you're doing is, and when you get into that habit, you end up, what you're always trying to do is to just try and see that there aren't any of these lean ewes. I mean, I've got one flock here, it's about 4,500 ewes just up the road that I've been working with for a lot of years, and they started to get some lean ewes at scanning, and we started looking at them, and that's how we found that they had got, they're starting with a bit of mydivisna. But if we hadn't had those lean ewes and taken them to one side and said, hang on a minute, you lot, you shouldn't be lean, why are you? And we asked the question, we were able to nip that in the bud.
Great, yeah, that's interesting to know really. I hope that answers your question, Sarah. Our last question for this evening. So, does feeding an average quality concentrate 4 weeks before mating to reach condition score 3 actually leave a decent return?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you can get them, if it's the only way you're going to get them to condition score 3, then I would say yes, it is. Unfortunately, though, actually feeding concentrate is quite a difficult way to put condition on because it is only still a relatively small amount of feed. If you looked at those kilograms of dry matter that were in my graph, or if you want to go back and have a look at them later, that is one heck of a lot of energy. So your little bit of concentrate will help, and certainly I think the evidence that getting that condition on is worth spending a bit of money, but I would prefer that we started earlier, maybe even weaned earlier, and you didn't have to feed. Because once you start to feed, the question then is, when do you stop? Given what I said about the fact that we want to keep these ewes at least level and preferably just keeping going up the hill a little bit towards scanning, if you take that food away, you could go the other way. So the easy answer is yes, I think it is, but the more complicated answer is that you've got to keep it in context, I think.
Okay, that's brilliant. I hope that answered your final question as well. So just to remind everybody as well, as we mentioned earlier, there is a funding available for the animal health clinics. So who that you asked the question in terms of targeting only the thin ewes with a wormer over the next few weeks. If you are interested in fecal egg counting, that is also available through the animal health clinic. So just get in touch with your local development officer. It's definitely worthwhile to do that. So just to finish off, thank you very much, Leslie, for all your time tonight and for your presentation. It has been hugely interesting, and I'm sure we've all learned something. So thank you very much. Thank you all to our audience as well for joining us this evening. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ymuno hefo ni.